Welcome to the Westside Investors Network, WIN, your community of investing knowledge for growth. This is the Real Estate Professionals Investing Podcast for real estate professionals by real estate professionals. This show is focused on the next step in your career, investing. Thank you for listening, and please, if you like our content, rate us on your podcast provider. And now, your hosts, AJ and Chris Shepard.
In this episode, Bryan and Jonathan will be joining us to talk about how they started in the real estate industry and how they were able to expand their market from Alabama to neighboring cities. They also discuss the business strategies and approach they use to operate efficiently in the market, how to leverage and use technology, and the reason why real estate professionals are not bridging the gap to investing. Enjoy. Sweet. Well, thanks, Bryan and Jonathan, for coming on with us today. You guys are with AHI Properties out of Alabama. And Bryan, you're the current RVP for NARPM, and you guys both co-host the Profitable Powerhouse Properties podcast. Is that right?
We do. Awesome. We've been doing that, for 2 years. It's hard to believe, 2 years now. Yeah. And we started in 19 and just had the opportunity to do that. And the focus of that podcast, we focused it on investor education. So we deal with a lot of different investors. And what we found ourselves doing over a period of time was that transition that some property management company and firms make to where they're transitioning from accidental landlords to professional landlords. So we were making that transition and saw that opportunity, particularly in that middle ground area where we had investors that were focused on, buying investment property for different strategies, whether that's active or passive income. So it's worked well. We've been successful with that, as well as the migration of our business model, and we've been focused on that for this is our 7th year, really, to focus on that changeover in our business.
Nice. And then kind of backing up a little bit before that, how'd you guys both get into real estate, in general?
Me first?
You go first.
So growing up, I'm significantly younger than Bryan, which not to throw you on the spot there, buddy. But
thanks for pointing that out.
Poking a little bit there. Huh?
Look, we're friends as well, so it works. But my family was always in real estate. I grew up, my stepdad is a broker. My mother's got a real estate license. Growing up, one of my family friends was a broker, a RE/MAX broker, and just close in that kind of business all throughout growing up. My parents own a number of investment properties, rental properties, stuff all over Birmingham, essentially, and then vacation stuff down at the beach. So growing up, I knew about it. I understood it. I understood what it was anyways. And so in 2007, I got my real estate license with a Realty South, which was a small, it was big when I was at Realty South. It was it
was the largest real estate company in the state of Alabama at the time.
So yeah. And I was
got gobbled up by Warren Buffett.
Exactly. So. But I was 21 years old, and I was like, I can probably do this. I know how to sell things. I'm okay at that. And the first year of real estate was excellent. I did really well for a 21-year-old that didn't know what he was doing. I'd stumble into closings like, am I supposed to be here? And they'd be like, yeah, here's you some money. Go away. You get through it. And then the real estate market really crashed in Birmingham in 2008 and 2009. And I went from a really high year to, second jobs, trying to, make some money work, make some ends meet. And, got connected with some investors that my family friends that were real estate agents that are selling, $300,000 and $400,000 and $500,000 houses didn't want to deal with these, $30,000 and $40,000 little investment properties. I'm not going to deal with this guy. You go work with it. Here's a bunch of foreclosures. Figure out how that works. And so that's how I survived in real estate was, working other jobs also, but, getting through with those investors and working with trying to understand how investing in real estate, really what parts are the important parts of making money. It's not just buy it and sell it later. It's buy it and will it cash flow now? How much will it cash flow? And can I leverage this cash flow later on something else, or can I hang on to it and allow that to make enough money that I can make an upgrade here or there in what period of time? And just learning little things from these handful of little investors that I just kind of stumbled into. Over the years, my wife actually started working here at AHI and introduced me to Bryan and at a Christmas party some number of years ago. And me and Bryan talked at the Christmas parties. And after a couple of years of that, I was like, Bryan, why don't you hire me here? I think I could work for you. And apparently I tricked him enough into saying yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So my past is a little more checkered, if you will. But so I grew up in West Virginia. I'm a transplant to Alabama. I have more or less been here since 1996 when I got out of the military after 9 years of active service. Kind of did a few things. I actually came to work for our corporate housing company, which belongs to my partner in AHI Properties. But my wife has ran that company for the last 31 years now. So they specialize in fully furnished short-term corporate rentals, typically apartments, do some houses, but that kind of came on later. But I worked for them for a couple of years and then went back out on my own in a contractor-related field. I actually got invited to come back to Alabama. I'd moved back home to West Virginia. My parents are entrepreneurs. They have automotive parts stores and garages, so I was helping them expand their business for a couple of years. But Ralph's partner actually invited me to come back to Birmingham and really to form what is now AHI Properties. We didn't have a clue that's what it was going to become at the time. So that was in 2000. But the goal for coming back is we actually saw a transition and a need for rental homes, A-class rental homes specifically for a fully furnished corporate leaseback model. So we came in and started investing in A-class properties. And I think initially we purchased within a 24-month period, we had 52 A-class assets that we were doing corporate leasebacks to, particularly one auto manufacturer and a lot of their suppliers. And moved from that model. The same Realty South that he spoke of was getting out of the rental business and approached us because we've always done that short-term piece with them, and then they convert it to a longer-term resale to people relocating into the Birmingham market. So we ended up purchasing their rental division, which was called Rent South. I think that's one of two acquisitions we've done through the years. We had 109 properties with them, all accidental landlords, and brought them in. I think I probably still have maybe 5 of those left now since 2003.
We looked at that the other day. I think it is 5. We looked at those the other day.
So that's a small percentage for sure.
It is. And again, it was accidental landlords, and we stayed in that model really up until 07, 08 happened. And then we started figuring out we need to do some sort of transition. We survived that just fine. But our corporate housing side of the business really drove the early years with their needs. And their needs specifically were best example would be if we had 30 people coming in for a 90-day project in the Birmingham, that model in the late 90s, early 2000s changed into, a dozen or less people coming in for a year. And with that, they wanted to rent a house versus an apartment. They wanted to bring their pets, their families, that sort of thing. So that's what drove that fully furnished model, which we still do well today. We bought those houses initially with a strategy of holding for 7 and then flipping those out for retail resales. Got stuck with 07 and 08, started having to replace some systems, reset those calendars again. And matter of fact, we're coming up on third resets on a lot of those. We've sold a few of them, and added a few, but really just diversifying that portfolio. So I came into it first before I was ever really into real estate as an agent or a broker, coming into it as an investor on that front. And then we've been able to blend those products pretty well. And then, as I said, Ralph and I really dove into it. Around 2015, we really got serious about focusing on getting out of that accidental landlord model into that intentional investor and more importantly, that institutional investor, and started pursuing that. And that really exploded our growth. The only other acquisition we've done, to give you kind of an idea, we did a 33 home management acquisition. So we've only acquired that 109 and that 33, but we maintain about 80 properties that we own within our portfolio. Otherwise, we typically push 1,300 homes under management to kind of give you an idea. And we've started it all here in Birmingham. Our corporate housing side of our business has 10 office locations, mainly throughout the Southeast, all the way up to Cincinnati, Ohio. But then we're as far west as Oklahoma City and Tulsa. And then we've grown the property management model into all 4 Alabama major marketplaces, Huntsville, Birmingham, Montgomery, and Mobile. And then we've expanded into Oklahoma City, was our newest expansion a couple of years ago. And it's, it's kind of the mentality of if it makes sense to go there with a client to get us seated and started, and then we go and we learn that market, develop it, and then grow it from there. So
Nice.
That's been our growth strategy.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great idea. With your guys' acquisitions, are you guys just staying in those major Alabama markets, or are you going out to the tertiary markets too?
Major marketplaces. We try to stay 35, 40 minutes outside the metros maximum. So we're able to continue our level of service.
Stretch us to like 47 minutes.
Yeah.
But I don't like it.
It takes a
I don't
special
like
client
it.
to be able to do that. So
I'll come and draw a line in the road and go, we're not going past this line. They'll say, but come on.
No, we just want to focus.
It's
focus
20% less, just a mile further.
I'm a big softy. They talked me into it, AJ.
So we just figured out as you guys probably know, just from the management perspective. I mean, when you're developing out because we actually outsource our vending and we manage it in-house. So we do a lot of project management pieces and that sort of thing. But to build those vendor networks and to do it really well, if you stay within that radius, for us, I mean, it's a little slower. You can be anywhere in Birmingham in 40 minutes from one side of town to the cross side of town. And that's kind of the same for the markets that we're in. Even OKC's comparable to Birmingham with, population of the metro population is 1.125 million, I believe. Tulsa and Oklahoma are about the same size. So a little more spread out, but you can still, just the way the traffic's laid out, you can still be anywhere in that marketplace in about 40 minutes. And that's kind of what our focus has been. And even our corporate housing offices, we are in Atlanta. And I won't say I'll never go to Atlanta, but having been the Atlanta chapter president and understand how many companies, really good companies, are over there, I've got, I'd rather compete with friendly competitors like Matthew Whitaker here locally in a few other markets, as opposed to 25 or 30 good managers in Atlanta proper. So, but really, it's really focusing on those B markets and just allowing us to have that flexibility and to be a heavy hitter the moment we hit the market, and really have that focus on quality across the market. So if we have a lot of investors that actually invest with us in multiple marketplaces and consistently get the same product from one market to the next. So that's really our focus. It's not just a cookie cutter corporate approach, but it's really hands-on, specialized to the market. But ultimately, you get that same practice and skill set across multiple markets.
One of the things that I like about us I do our business development. So I'm talking with a lot of our new clients, whether they're in Mobile or Montgomery or wherever they happen to be. I talk to a lot of them. And one of the things that our size, being in the different markets that we are in, even if we are in, and Mobile is just a good example because it's our smallest market, number of properties. A normal property manager in that area that had the same number of properties that we do would not have the resources to have the kind of systems in place that we carry with us. And so it helps us being, anchored here in Birmingham with the resources that we have, allowing the software that we use in Mobile, allowing us to have the resources, the vendors, the technology pieces that we all get because we have 1,200-ish properties. That makes us have the ability to have some extra bells and whistles that another 100-home property management company wouldn't be able to afford, really. That helps us in some of these markets that if we want to branch out, if we start a new market that's maybe a B-class market, we can come in there ready to go. We're not starting from scratch, even if we've still got to find like the local talent. We've still got to learn the local market. We are still coming in with all these resources ready to go. Like all we got to do is find the local talent here, plug them into our systems, teach them how to use it. We're as good as we are in any other market.
Yeah, it's kind of what we talked about the last board meeting for NARPM, AJ, in which I talked about creating that stickiness and really understanding the importance of having a larger operation with more systems in place and versus a mom and pop shop, and what we can give you in creating a stickiness factor with your residents, staying in the property for longer periods of time, doing those rental increases, but at the same time keeping your owners for a longer period of time, because we're giving them benefits that they can't otherwise get through a local mom and pop operation.
I'm not gonna lie, I hear a lot of people from NARPM talk about the churn that they have. And like Chris and I just have not experienced a lot of churn. We maybe have like one or two clients leave us a year. And like I'm hearing from some other people, like some maybe companies a little bit larger than us, but they're losing like 100 or 200. And I'm like, that's a lot to replace sometimes.
And sometimes it happens. We just offboarded 144 mid-January, but it was a REIT client.
It's only one client.
One client, though.
And that's only half their portfolio. But they were internalizing their their Birmingham operation. So internalizing the management of it because they can handle that piece, but we still manage in another marketplace for them. So, but we knew that coming into it. At some point, you take that client on, that's their end strategy. So, knowing that in advance, I mean, yes, it's a lot of cash flow and it's hard to replace, but it's really not hard to replace. You take them in, whether it's another large chunk or you're taking 20 or 30 or 40 from an investor coming in and putting some cash down. It's like today we were talking to an investor that had keyed up. They've got $5 million to deploy immediately as soon as we find the assets. So that's pretty consistent with us. Just trying to find assets, whether it's already existing inventory or land, so they can develop it and build, which to me is pretty exciting. I loved it when we started taking on new construction stuff because I hadn't seen new construction in our space, in the rental space, since prior to leading up to 07 and 08. You had some of it. After that, it dried up because there was no new construction going on in the marketplaces. So it's nice to see that rebounding and build that inventory. And it's just the perfect storm right now. It's a great time to be in not only real estate, but in rental property specifically.
Yeah, right. And that sounds like a great problem to have. You need to help somebody deploy $5 million. That also sounds like it makes kind of developing and finding a new market a little bit easier, because if that investor is trusting you guys, you'll be able to deploy, say some of those funds into Oklahoma City or into, one of your newer markets. I'm really interested to hear more about how you guys are strategizing moving it into, just walk us through your startup in Oklahoma City. I'd love to hear that.
Well, it's kind of, and I won't say we'll do this every time, but we went to Oklahoma City and I probably should backtrack a little bit. So with the 10 corporate housing office locations, they're brick and mortar. So I already have the hardest part of it done. So as Jonathan said, it's really about hiring local talent, deploying systems, providing whatever equipment you need to get going. So really the interest being there, and OKC and in particular, we opened out there with a small investment client with about 25 houses. But we knew the opportunity was there. We'd already had the corporate housing model in place for about 6 years prior to that. And we're really encouraged by everything going on in the city. Not only that, you have Tulsa that's a little over an hour away by interstate. And they're two distinctly different markets, even though they're similar in size. They have a completely different feel. So getting into the marketplace and knowing that we're able to grow it, and it's met and really exceeded our expectations because the opportunities just keep coming at us. And it's almost like, when you go to an event like an IMN, if you guys have ever been to those or plugged into that network, which is where we started building relationships with larger investors, just paying attention and keeping your ear to the ground to what's going on nationally, what's getting the national attention. And while it's nice to hear Birmingham, it's like, we've got major players just now coming to Birmingham and they're way too late into the game. So trying to pick up on what's happening early. And when you start hearing about it, it's probably already been there for 5 or 6 years already. Somebody's already been working it and having great success at it. And that's really what we started to see with Oklahoma. Oklahoma City in particular started getting some attention. And it wasn't long before we picked up another client with 128 properties adding into that portfolio, and then individuals, and then some, intentional investors with pockets of 5 or 10 or whatever. So developing the marketplace and just deploying those strategies, that's kind of our first approach is, okay, what makes sense out of what we have brick and mortar wise to focus on? And realistically, we've had this discussion, a couple of great markets that we really like are Chattanooga, which we're in, Louisville, Kentucky. It's another market that we're in and currently servicing Lexington as well. So we'll tend to look at those markets first, but also have opportunities from clients that say, hey, we're building 200 houses over here. Will you guys take a look at it? And if it makes sense, numerically, of course, we'll come alongside that and we can easily deploy a branch market in the vicinity of where we're at. And in some cases, like Montgomery, we didn't have a presence in Montgomery, but a Montgomery marketplace is an hour and 15 minutes south of our Birmingham office.
It's the capital of Alabama. I mean, it just makes sense for us to have something there.
So, and we do enough corporate housing business, and they service that market from our Birmingham location. We needed their block of business to give us the footprint where we could have a stationary office of benefit to them as well as us. in a prime location in the city. And so we just went with it. But, we went down there with, 168 properties initially, which was a little different than the 25.
Sure.
That was kind of a no-brainer. But that's kind of how we approach it. We're going to figure out the marketplace, look at the dynamics from the real estate perspective, and then focus in on those, look at it as a macro market and then dive into it on a micro level and figure out the different aspects of the city and develop those markets, and then try to develop those relationships with the investors. And one thing that we've been successful in doing with that, we talk about systems, but one of the key ingredients we had early on was developing a relationship to where we could tap into master policies on the insurance side and develop those master policy opportunities for investors that wanted to, particularly for investors through like Roofstock or one of those platforms that want to buy in multiple areas, multiple marketplaces, multiple states, being able to be that firm that brings you the opportunity, hey, you can buy your insurance through here and you can have a property in Michigan and Alabama, Oregon, California, wherever you want to have it, and you can all have them under the same master policy. Yeah. That was something no one was doing at the time. We've been doing that for several years now. But it just gives you that ability just to transfer that knowledge of, hey, we have systems that work across multiple platforms, and we're happy to help you even when you're outside of our marketplace. Mm-hmm. I am probably one of the, number one endorsees of NARPM operators. And, the first thing I'll do, even in an area I don't know, I'll go to NARPM's website and I'll figure out who the MPMs are in the area. If there's no MPMs, who the RMPs are, and really reach out to those people and see if they're going to be a good fit. And we have that all the time. I mean, some of our clients that we have are buying in other states and marketplaces. Some of them are within my region, which is kind of nice, being the southeast region of NARPM. But identifying operators that are going to be a good fit. And not, just because they're a NARPM operator doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be a good fit for a very sophisticated investor that has high demands. And, that's a reflection on all of us. So whether we can operate within their requirements and expectations and exceed those or not. So that's kind of our strategy. And it's one of those, I always say my dad and grandfather always told me, you'll be successful in business if you do what you say when you say you're going to do it. That's the two golden rules to follow. So
yeah, that's pretty solid, sound advice from Dad. So you guys are kind of anchored through your corporate business, through your corporate rentals business. I mean, at least you've got brick and mortar space in all of the locations where you have property management. Like that's a pretty huge advantage when it comes to expansion. Because
it is. There's different operating strategies out there. I know you guys probably both know Jen Stoops, but I've talked to her in detail about their operation and the idea of having a hub office and really going back to one of the early questions you had about servicing areas outside the major metros, which is what piqued my interest with that. It's being able to service some of these smaller communities that are 45 minutes an hour away from the metro areas. And how do you do that successfully? And I think they have a great model that allows them to do that.
Oh, I agree.
Because they're servicing about 10 different marketplaces with a centralized hub office. And the illustration she always gives is the hub and the spokes on the wheel, which is a great analogy. But so there's a lot of different ways you can set your business up. And
well, then again, that's kind of back to the technologies piece. That's the kind of thing that you have to have in place to be able to do something like that.
Yeah.
And we have we have a lot of technologies in place that allow us to operate efficiently in our market space. But
COVID's probably enhanced that.
COVID definitely has for a lot of people. But I mean, there was a time when we showed properties that we had a leasing manager would go out, visit the property with the tenant. And that's how we lease properties. And he's a great salesman. We do. I mean, we've been doing.
There's a lot of people that still do that.
Yes, and they need to listen to this podcast, and they need to listen to a few people. But so we went with a self-showing option in 2018.
No, it was actually we were with them from 17 forward, but we only went self-showing honestly late 18. So we've only been doing it a couple of years.
Yeah, but it was such a once we flipped that switch and started going. Can you imagine us trying to go back to not?
Oh no! And then like I said, once COVID happened, it just became the natural. It was
everybody's
actually unexpected. So,
well, then the ability to, talk with clients like, okay, no matter what size you are, you're probably working with some out-of-state investors, likely. I mean, if you're a good enough operator, you're likely to be working with some out-of-state clientele that's, interested in your market. And if you know your market well enough, you need to be able to present that well enough. And these Zoom calls, like what we're on right here, this has been such a tool that I wish I had, 10 years ago plus, to like be able to just operate this way. Let me explain to you my market. Let me pull up my screen and let me show you what I'm talking about here. I mean, I do it. Brian will walk past my desk all the time and he sees me on two screens. I've got a Zoom call over here.
Polygons drawn polygons on maps, explaining like, well, this is a micro market inside a micro market inside Birmingham. And we're going to talk about why this street is better than this street, why you need to buy this property. And then ultimately we're going to manage this property after you purchase it. And it's going to look like this. You can't do that over the phone. You can't do that when you meet someone for lunch at a restaurant. And that's great to sit there and have a good meal with somebody, but it's not exactly an effective business strategy. It's not a good way to get someone to, they're not going to sign that management agreement that you got in your pocket that you're sitting there, let's have some beers and you'll sign this. You're not displaying your expertise or your knowledge of the market. Maybe you can talk someone through it, but when you can show them on their own screen, this is what I'm talking about, and this is why, and here's the data to prove it, because here's the data. Let me show you why that's important. And then this is a cash flow projection of what that looks like. Ta-da! And that's why we have success with consultation. It's really dialing it down and not just keeping it very generic. I mean, you speak with a lot of agents that want to work with investors. They're really key toward retail resale, but they speak in generalities. So it's kind of like the call he took yesterday. He was telling me about. It's just like this guy just knows he wants to spend money in Birmingham. He has no idea what he wants, where he wants, any of that.
What's the rent like in Birmingham?
General numbers on the entire metro area. It's like, well, you need to dial it in much deeper than that. So, but the thing with like Zoom technology, we were using Zoom technology a couple of years ago. So before it even became a thing that it is today with COVID, but just dialing in and even having those bad conversations with your owners where you've got to problem solve, work those out. I prefer to do all that stuff on Zoom. And then we have larger clients that we have either weekly or every other week meetings with, foreign and domestic, in which we're all plugged in. And that was going on before COVID. And everybody, I mean, there's just a lot of buy-in. And we've taken it kind of to the next step. I mean, one of the things we have opted to do in 2021, I think, AJ, you and I were talking about this the other day, is to actually have those quarterly Zoom calls, which are by invitation. We kind of set the programming. Our managers are all involved in different branch locations and providing the education piece to our owners by our SVP, and then building upon that for the next one. And we cover what we want to cover over 4 of those meetings per year. And the podcast piece, in addition to what I mentioned earlier, we use a lot of that as education, where we push it out to potential owners on the front end. And it helps them make their decision really, really quickly as to whether or not they want to use this or not, just based on
they feel like they know you after they've listened to you guys talk. Yeah. That technology, self-showing lockboxes in Zoom, it's crazy what it's going to do to the market and just the adoption of those technologies, like especially for property management. It's if you're not adopting it, then you are just going to totally be left behind. Prices are going to get probably driven down a little bit lower as the technology makes it easier.
Well, but what we also find is some of your systems that are great ideas to you. I mean, getting that broadcast across to your owners in a way that they can understand it, just like security deposit replacement option,
which has been gangbusters
since we went live with it. But we chose to go with a company called Rhino after many years of searching, and we love it. But just getting that message out, the advantage of it.
You mean we're not going to have a security deposit?
Yeah.
Yes, you are. Come on. Listen to what I said earlier.
But when you transition to intentional investors and professional investors, they understand that. It's the leveraging. And then being able to flip that around. So you've got not only, you don't have a security deposit, but you actually have more leverage because they're coming in at 1.5 or 2 times the rent on the policy, and having the experience of having them pay out some policies and understanding how system works and how easy it works, and being able to report those results back to your clients. But just being able to broadcast that, it's kind of what I was telling Jonathan here today. The beauty of it is you can record this. Even if you jump on a Zoom to just record it and then blast it out, you're saying it one time versus having an hour-long discussion with a potential client, having the same discussion.
Which I have those same discussions every day.
You do, but we also have multiple branch managers doing the same thing with business development. So you're ensuring a consistent message is going out versus relying on somebody 200 miles away that is out of eyesight and earshot of you as to what they're saying, how they're delivering it, what promises they may be making to a potential client. So it's so, extremely big advantage for us.
Bryan, you touched on kind of the accidental landlord and then the intentional investor. Mm-hmm. And we've always seen, sometimes that accidental landlord actually turns into the intentional investor.
Yes, that's the best kind.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, they go on that journey with you and they're just so thankful. But what do you think it is that takes that accidental landlord, or maybe it's a real estate agent or a mortgage broker who kind of like sees the light? What is it, that spark that gets them into, oh, wow, I should be investing intentionally and buying some of these properties and creating long-term wealth?
I guess when we were chit-chatting before we started recording, but we were talking about one of the focuses we were talking about is strategy, whether that be active or passive strategy. I think what gets them really focused is when they're able to understand that they, should have diversified investments. So whether that's, whatever that looks like, but real estate should be part of that diversification. And then within the real estate component of it is back to what Jonathan was talking about, whether it's a buy and hold strategy. We also have some investors that they'll come in, they'll do a rehab, they'll do investor to investor sales because they understand there's a marketplace for that. And
especially
there's a standing order marketplace for that. And then we have the traditional, the folks that want to come in, buy it, and they want to rehab it to retail flip, and they're reselling it retail because the retail sales market is so hot. So any of those strategies, or better yet, a combination of those strategies seems to work well. And once they dive into the different layers of that onion and understand, hey, we don't have to get stuck into one mold. We can do multiple things with this and really create not only some instant cash flow and wealth, but also some longer term stuff, depending on what you're buying, the likelihood of equity gain down the road. And I mean, there's all different, every marketplace really has those models within those areas, those market areas that you can develop it out. You can buy a couple here, there. And I think I learned that lesson when I started first dealing with investment groups back in, probably 05, 06 and leading into 07, to where, you have properties here, but you also have properties in Ohio and Indiana and Texas, and understanding why they chose to do that and having those interviews with them and understanding, okay, well, somebody explained it that, you should try to do this and not put all your properties into one locale. But I think that's important. And we have a long-standing history of working with realtors, and most property management firms do. And our strategy with that is on our sales side, we're only, as a company, focused on investors. We are not focused on retail sales listings. We're not being competitive. We leave that to the retail specialist. We work hand in hand. We pay good referrals. We always have the guarantee that somebody refers somebody in, they get first crack if that person wants to resell or buy a property, depending on whether it's a tenant or an owner, and standing by that and have a long-term reputation of doing that. But going out to sales market meetings at real estate offices and just educating them on how we can be a tool for them, that's the important thing. Right now, we're trying to figure out, okay, one of the things we were talking about a couple of weeks ago was creating the education piece for the agent that's been in retail resale that really doesn't understand how to deal with investors and understanding how they can analyze properties correctly for an investor, and then turning that into additional business where they're referring properties into us for management.
What I think was the most fun aspect of specifically that, I have still, I guess technically it's under contract, but we had a property that we were selling for one of our investors. It's a multifamily unit, and there's not Like if you're trying to buy multifamily in Birmingham, there's like one,
It's
maybe
tough.
two options, maybe there's nothing. There's nothing. So I was at home and my phone rang and I didn't recognize it. It's probably a real estate agent. I'll pick it up and answer. And it's this lady that's telling me about my property and she wants to come and see it. But on my listing, because it's a fully occupied unit, I mean, and the way, and most real estate agents understand why I have these in there. But she asked these questions and was like, okay, hang on, let's talk. She was like, so it says that there's no showings allowed unless there's an accepted offer. How are we supposed to make an offer if we can't see it? I'm like, because it's the numbers and there's tenants in place. And so there's,
Investment
can't disturb the tenant. It's investment property. And she was like, well, I don't understand that. And I was like, okay, well, you're not going to get this property because we're under contract. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
it's not going to happen.
They don't understand the true definition of you'll have your ability to do your due diligence.
There's diligence
in the buying process.
It sounds like, but let's talk about this. Where did your client come from? I want you to be able to talk to your client, in an educated fashion about this. She's like, well, I paid for Zillow leads. I've really only been in real estate for like a handful of months. And she's super sharp, actually. Like I talked to her for probably an hour and a half on the phone, and she's there. She's great. She can present an idea if she knows what the idea is incredibly well. She's got that great retail real estate agent personality. I'm sure in the end of 2021, she's going to be a great agent out there, when it comes to this. But the investment market and how that truly works and the little tricks, if she was going up, against an investment property against me, why I'm pretty sure that I would probably win that property just because of the strategies of how to offer and leverage some aspects. And it's not just a number on a paper that you're trying to make work. We've got these other little fancy things like, all right, we're going to do our contingency period like this, and I'm going to leverage this aspect here, and we'll pay your closing costs for whatever we've got to little like fool around with here to make some things work.
Well, driving it with actual data and not forecasting, but really just using the data to.
And so, I talked to her for a couple of hours just about like what I do and how that works and where I get my numbers from and why I know this, that, or the other thing. Like, well, how do you know that the rent values are this? Because what they rent for, but this is where I get that. So she's like, all right, so this week I'm going to go and meet her and like a handful of her little real estate agent friends. We're going to learn from Jonathan about how real estate investment works. And I'm like, I appreciate that. I'd love to teach you. We're going to start at a very low basic level because it's good for you to know this kind of thing so that when you're dealing with a lot of out-of-state investors that are trying to buy, when they throw out, what's the gross yield on this? What's the cap rate on this? That you don't just sit there and go, yeah, it's good. It's probably real good. And you don't know what that means.
Do you think that, they as realtors will eventually, want to learn more about it and become investors themselves?
Some will, for sure.
Some will. I think it's a product of the marketplace. And what I mean by that is, when 07 and 08 happened, and then we had a larger than normal foreclosure marketplace and then construction ceasing and, throw in all the different variables. Retail sales initially took a dip. People get out of the industry. It's kind of survival mode. So right now they're feasting on the residential sales market, right? But when at some point when that starts to diminish or go away, then the focus is going to be back on the other side of the business, which is going to be the investment, the property management side of it.
Not all of them will retain it.
No.
They definitely won't.
No.
But some will. Some that will. And I think this is also when we were talking earlier about what makes that transition from accidental landlord to intentional landlord. I think this kind of conversation is one of those things that triggers that. It's because when they talk with us or when they talk with Bryan and they'll be talking about their one property that they had to move out of because they couldn't sell it and they needed to downsize. They'll be asking a question about, well, how do we handle this maintenance item here? I've had a tenant there for 14 years and I don't even know what remarketing a property looks like because we've never had to do it. That kind of thing. It's pretty typical for some of our, for our accidental landlords that have had properties for a long time with us. So we're going through like, well, this is how we do this and this is why we do this. And you give them some anecdotal story about this is one of our investors did something like this and this is how that turned out. They're like, oh, okay. And they start hearing some success stories from, and then it always starts out with like that real innocent question. So one of my friends has a rental property in, and they will throw out some area that I know, like, you've waited 10 years too long to invest in that area. You've missed the boat. So tell me about Avondale. And I'm like, yeah, you want to spend $500,000? You're a bit late to invest in it. But they've heard it.
Right.
But it gets them what is the next Avondale? What is the next Hoover? What is the next big explosive market going to be? Do you know? Do you have any idea? And I'm like, yes. Do we want to talk about that now? And then it just leads to that aspect.
So I got a question for you guys. Like, the people that are seeing that sort of stuff, like the real estate agents and, the mortgage brokers that are doing all that stuff, those professionals, like, why is it that not more of them are investing in real estate and becoming those real estate investors?
The funny thing, and we were talking about this 3.5 weeks ago, because there's a real estate agent that we both really like. We deal with them a lot in closings. And he was on somebody else's show, and they were asking the question. And the angle at which he came back with for an answer to that exact question was, no, I don't invest in real estate because I don't want there to be any conceived conflict of interest. I want my clients to know I am focused on their needs. But again, it was kind of generic responses to investor-related questions on marketplace, and just trying to, attract the flies with sugar. But it's that's one strategy.
Yeah, it is. But I have an answer. It's because they don't have all the data. They have partial data.
That's right.
They have a lot of hearsay. They don't see the end result because they're agents instead of property managers. The proof is always in the pudding, and if they don't have the pudding, they're not making the pudding. They send it off to someone else to, I had this idea and I think it'll work. Can you guys make that work? And then it's closed. Wash my hands and I'm done.
Yeah, quite honestly, the good experience in an investment, in a real estate investment, is the property manager relationship. How well can that property manager manage that property for you? That's where that's where your cash flow is coming from on the buy and hold strategy stuff. And that's where they don't have the data. Yeah, they don't have it.
So they'll sit there, and a good example talking about him is, you'll start to hear things. And as a real estate agent, you're not doing a lot of renting usually. Just typically in Birmingham, a lot of the real estate agents, they're worried about sales. They don't really track what rental values are. They might, and this guy does. He knows what things pop up on the market for, but we all know advertising a market price for a thing and actually signing a lease for something, that's a big difference. And if somebody puts something in his ear, or you see one Zillow pop up at $950 in a market where typically they're getting $800 or $850, and that's what the leases are actually being signed for. Well, you see $950 and you say, well, yeah, there's properties over here, leasing for $950. That's what you say, and that's what makes sense because you saw this one. One does not mean that's what they lease for. That means one of them was marketed for that. But then that $950 gets rounded up to, they're like $1,000. This whole area rents for like $1,000 a month. And no, it doesn't. One property was advertised for $950. The majority of them rent for $875 or $825, whatever the number happens to be. But they don't have that end result data because they're not managing the property in the end. And so that they hear these horror stories of, that's what they want to do. And they don't have enough data to truly drive them into, they don't have the confidence to pull it off, because they might hear one of their clients come back to them and say, I know it was supposed to rent for $1,000, but man, it's out on the market for.
I personally went through
70
that
days
back in 05 and 06 when we had a decent sized group out of California that was buying property in Alabama following Katrina, because there were some great tax benefits and write-offs there. But they were buying new construction, but they were relying on the sales agents to provide them with rental comps. And across the board, rental comps were $250 to $300 per month too high, which obviously affected their cash flow numbers. And to explain that to somebody living in California, seeing California price points and just realizing how cheap real estate is in Alabama, it was an easy sell. But the problem became, once the closing happened, property was turned over to the manager, and then the expectation before we ever got to lay hands on it was, you're going to rent for X, and it was really Y is where you needed to be, right? So just being able to negotiate through that and work that scenario
really makes it tough when the real estate agents set you up for failure.
That's right.
So you guys mentioned that the property managers have the keys to the castle. And so why aren't there more property managers who are investing in real estate themselves?
That's a great question.
Time. When I have an LLC to do it. I mean, I had the time to build an LLC, and we've got one. Brian's got LLCs. We would like to do it more. We see that it can be done. We know that it can be done. But my clients are more important than my own portfolio unless I quit here and start doing my own. And we do. Like, I do.
Yeah, it's not.
Brian doesn't.
I know the way we operate is we don't sit around and save the best deals for ourselves, cherry pick out of what comes across our desks. But yeah, there's opportunity. I mean, we just closed on 3 downtown condos to turn them into fully furnished corporate units and looking for more. I mean, price points downtown have gone just nuts. The same thing with Huntsville, but just trying to take advantage of those marketplaces and deploy some of our own capital to come up with that. But ultimately, I think it goes back to the majority of property managers are not operating in the same space. They're operating with the accidental landlords. Because paying attention nationally, and the bulk of like our membership, even in NARPM, the bulk of those operators are operating, 300 unit portfolios, and they're focused on accidental landlords. And with that, that's a whole different.
All you see is the danger in that case. I think.
Yeah, you're just seeing individual property, and you're really not diving all the way into cash flow. All they're really seeing is, these are the expenses we take out every month, and this is the check or ACH that I send the owner at the end of the month. That's all they see. They don't see everything else.
And they're making $50 a month.
Right. I mean, somebody posted on one of the property manager Facebook pages this week, actually. They were like, how many of you invest in real estate? And I was surprised. There were like 68 or 9 responses, and there were only about 20. So not even a third. So we'll say less than a third, probably closer to a quarter might invest. I do think that is part of that makeup model of how you're operating. And if you're dealing with investors, you're more prone to buy your own investment properties. And particularly when you get into the model where you're doing rehabs and you're able to go out and lay eyes on a property, or better yet, you're able to take information on a computer and just analyze it at your desk and determine an approximate within probably 10% of what you're actually going to spend on that property to determine what your rehab costs are and build out your entire formula that way. That's the beauty of it, but that takes practice and a lot of experience.
So it's education.
It is an education piece.
So that's the reason is as many property managers as there are, not all of them understand every aspect of things. I mean, I know there's people in our offices that don't understand why everything that we do is why we do it. They do it because that's what we're supposed to do, but not everybody has that.
Yeah, they don't understand why we went from A to B to C.
That's what they're supposed to do. That's what their job is. Okay. And so it takes someone that understands things from a bigger picture and is intentionally educated on this is how investing makes sense in real estate, as opposed to, because I think a lot of that typical model is I buy in a nice area and then let it be a nice, secure area. Because when you tell them the way that a lot of people are investing right now are in higher risk zones, higher risk areas, you're saying risk right off the start of it. So, I don't want any risk. Well, there is risk. You're investing. That's what that is. Yeah. You have all the tools and all the knowledge right here to make it the least risk possible, but it's always going to be a risk. What if somebody burns it down? Well, somebody burns it down. You have insurance. What if it doesn't rent? Well, it doesn't rent. Do this right and you'll be fine. And it's getting past those lack of confidence. That's the answer. Lack of confidence in education is what.
The other piece that I would add to that would be, there's some groups that do it well and some that do not. But don't hire, but build a team. That makes sense. You're not hiring a gun for hire in a property manager or a real estate agent or a contractor. You're building a team with one centralized mission. So understanding that there's a difference between those two things and having transparency and honesty between all team members, that's how you're successful. And that's what most people can't quite piece all that together.
Yeah.
You guys kind of nailed, what we're kind of compiling as a couple of the major things that are stopping real estate professionals from investing in real estate. One of them certainly is knowledge. And that's something that we really hope to help with. Mm-hmm. The other, Jonathan, you mentioned is time, especially being a property manager. Just there's never enough time in the day to get all your stuff. It's just like, okay, what stuff can I just push off until at some point in the future?
Yeah, what is currently on fire? What is on fire? That's what I'm going to go do.
Well, the balance in that is trying to get from where you're. And it took me several years to get from reactive to proactive, and turning that cycle. But man, there are so many property managers out there that are stuck in that reactive cycle, and that's all they can do is put out fires all day, and it's they're just their heads on a swivel. They have no time to focus on.
Calendly. Go ahead, AJ.
Oh, I was going to say, if you're doing that all week long, by the time it gets to Friday afternoon, you really do need that. You really do need that drink.
You don't need time to invest. You need time to sleep.
So one of the big time savers that recently Bryan and I both did is we got Calendly accounts. I'll call you if you want time to speak with me. We can figure out exactly what you need to work through. And it's organized my days in a way that I'm not putting out fires anymore. It's not, I hadn't called this guy back yet. Did he schedule? It's scheduled. It's scheduled right here. This time of day, I know I got to call this person. I've got to be here. I just schedule it. That way it keeps me from missing something.
It's just an expectation as well for your potential client who may become your client to say that, hey, we're professionals. We're not, fly by the seat of your pants organization or an individual.
I'm not just sitting around waiting on your call.
That's where a lot of owners, just don't fully understand the sophistication of just a best-in-class operator doing property management very well and understanding the importance of that piece.
I believe that it's just all a lack of knowledge, because you just mentioned how you can save so much time scheduling appointments using Calendly. There are, hundreds of other ways to save time, and it just comes down to knowledge. Like in the money piece as well, like as a property manager, how many investors do you know? How many investors do you know that would invest with you? And
there's hundreds of ways to come up with money. I mean, that's the
money. Money's not even on there. There's so many options that you have to do that.
Like my partner's strategy has always been use other people's money.
Yeah. Why would you ever use your own money?
Yeah. Why use your own money?
Come on.
You can start using your own money, but you need to be using other people's money so you can deploy your own money further out. So, and just multiply that. And it's worked for him. He's older than I am. I mean, he's been doing it for decades and done extremely well with it. But that's kind of my philosophy as well. It's like, the thing is, you tie all your wealth up in a couple properties and you're kind of stuck with a couple properties.
Exactly.
So,
yeah.
I did this twice. Who ends up with $1 million cash to buy all these? They don't have $1 million cash. What are you talking about? They had $10,000 and bought 5 properties. What do you? Yeah. Come on now.
I mean, we know people that's it's important to them to own it and just be collecting that mailbox money.
You're right. There's some, but there's it's a calculated risk, and so I think everybody's afraid to make that mortgage payment if they don't collect their rent. Right? That's I'm losing money. Are you? And it's back to that knowledge piece. You have to be smart enough, or you have to educate yourself enough to prepare. If you're prepared, if you walk in going, I'm going to pay 3 months of mortgage, I know that from the start before I start getting a rent check that's going to be covering my mortgage payment, you can plan for that. You can schedule that in your brain. You know what you're doing. All right, I'm going to go there. I've got this much work I've got to get done to this property. Now it's rent ready at this time. The days on market are this many days. I'm going to price it slightly below market value so that maybe I can get it lower than those days on market. But ultimately, I'm going to plan for 3 months worth of mortgage that I've got to pay. All right, great. Let's get that money set aside. Now let's go buy the property. I got the property, work it. Then at month 4, when it's paying, then you're exactly where you were supposed to be anyways. Yeah, and so you don't need any more money than you already planned for. Now you're only making money.
Yeah, and the other piece of it is that's really important to me because we hear it all the time, and people that kind of misstep on this, but having that cash reserve, so if you have something that does take place unexpectedly, being able to handle it. I mean, I've got some very high-end houses with a couple different investment groups, and it's amazing if somebody's late on the rent. It's like, how torque these guys become, because it's like, oh, I need to rent, pay my mortgage. It's like, well, you need to subscribe to this education piece where you need to have some cash reserve in reserve, be able to handle these unforeseen situations. So to me, that's where it's important you deploy your own wealth to be able to weather those storms.
Even matters even more during COVID.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
I don't know if you guys still have an eviction moratorium, but we do. And it's through the end of July. And, there's a percentage of our portfolio that's just not paying. And if you didn't have cash reserves, if there's no way to maintain that portfolio, if you had the idea of a long-term hold, you need to have a cash reserve to be able to sustain yourself through the tough times. And that's one of the things that we've learned, is that if you're only investing, onesie twosie, maybe in one property 5 years ago and one property in the next 10 years, like that's more of the accidental landlord kind of mindset. Whereas an investor is always investing, and they're focusing on that deal analysis process where they're constantly finding the right property so that they can create that value on the purchase, or create the value on the purchase and the project that they're going to complete to add value to the property, so that now they have an asset that they bought for, say, $80,000 and it's worth $150,000 because they invested that $20,000 into it. And
that's exactly right.
Yep.
So I hate to run, but
I was going to say,
my boss is saying about 5 minutes. So.
We've got 4 questions that we come to at the end. So I'll start you guys off. What's one piece of advice you would give to your 25-year-old self?
Mine is patience, grasshopper. So, guys, I have a personal belief that I give to all my team members as I hire them. And it's really, I go back to my grandfather again. So my grandfather always told me, and I know you guys have heard this, but, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, use them proportionally, and being able to listen to people, not assuming know what they're looking for, but understand it by listening to what they're telling you, determining the direction of your discussion, your education, the building of your business. And that, I think when I was younger, I wanted to prove myself early on and kind of display my knowledge as I came upon it. But just understanding that, to really be a professional at what you do and have people understand it, it's really just to listen to what they're trying to tell you. That's the one piece of advice I would give myself.
I mean, that's way better advice than what I was going to say to my 25-year-old self.
I'm also older than you, as you pointed out.
Good point. I mean, I was just going to simply say, don't drink that. Whatever's in your hand, sit it down for a minute. But, I mean, realistically, when I was 25 years old, I was just trying to grasp what real estate investment was. And I was so far away from it and was scared of it. I mean, I was in that space that we were talking about with what's stopping people from investing. I wasn't confident in it because I didn't have that data. If I was going to go back to my 25-year-old self and tell them anything, first thing would be to call Bryan Jenkins. The second thing would be to gather more data.
I've had the same cell number for about that long.
I know, that's my point. It's only been 10 years, it's 11 years. I mean, just get myself in NARPM would have saved me so much time and effort.
That's a whole other topic.
I mean, it really is. But getting with people that know what you're trying to do and do that. Find someone that's doing what you wish you were doing.
There's great advice.
And go and hang out with them.
Yeah, I mean, I managed for a decade before I came across NARPM looking for software. And it's like, once I did, it's like, holy cow. The wealth of knowledge and operators and the ability and willingness to share has been instrumental in my professional life.
Cool. All right. So our next question is for each of you is, what was your first entrepreneurial endeavor growing up or in high school or in college or just out?
Oh, mine was, growing up in West Virginia, my very first entrepreneurial project was actually the resale of BlackBerries.
Oh, that's pretty close to what I got.
My grandmother was an elementary school cook and made the most fabulous BlackBerry jam. She made a lot of different things, but that jam and pies were her specialty, cobbler. So we would And my dad in the automotive parts stores, he would get brand new paint cans. We'd put the handles on them, go up in the woods, just pick these berries by the gallons, come back, sell some of them by the gallon, pay my grandmother a portion of the proceeds if she'd make jam or cobbler, so we could resell that. And
but how much of it did you eat?
Early on, quite a bit. But as the businessman side of me started to develop, it's like, I like this money. I can do a little bit more than just eat blackberry stuff. So but that was my first experience. And I grew up with, my parents are entrepreneurs. They've been working together since I was a junior in high school. And I won't tell you how many years ago that was, but it's been a while. And then my wife and I work together, which, takes a special relationship. Jonathan's wife works here, so they're in the same building as well. And not everybody can pull that off. And most of my friends are like, dude, I don't know how you do it. Because if I was around my wife that long, one of us would probably kill each other. So
we have good wives, Bryan. That's helpful. Our wives are pretty great.
Bryan, I was going to ask a quick little follow-up question. Did you solicit any of your friends to help you pick blackberries?
The funny thing is I've got a huge family. So occasionally you get a friend, but more often than not, I've got 3 brothers. We had probably immediately around us at least 15 cousins. And, we just had the whole clan We had acres and acres of land between my grandfather's land and our neighbors. And we used to help, they used to develop or bale hay and fix fence and, do all the things on the farm starting at 13. Because I realized, we were having a discussion the other morning. It's like, my parents would buy me school clothes, but it was never the cool stuff. So when I got to be that age, it's like my mom's like, okay, if you want to buy this stuff, you got to earn your own money, which is the best thing she could have done for me, because I did that and I bought my own clothes that I wanted to wear. So that's kind of what drove me. But that was, realistically from about the age of probably 11 forward, there was an emphasis from my parents teaching entrepreneurial skills.
Nice.
So I think if we're going to just say the first entrepreneurial venture I've ever had, doesn't mean most successful, does it?
No, not the most successful.
Don't 95% of small businesses fail?
Well, this one failed for sure, boys. So when I was in middle school and high school, I played football from the age of I can carry a football till I broke my neck playing football and I couldn't do it anymore. So when I was in middle school, I was a running back. I ran 12 miles a day. I could not keep weight on. And so school lunches were never even close to enough. Even at 12, 13 years old, they were not enough for me. So I would make a sandwich because my parents owned a college, which in turn owned a bakery, which makes this unfair. Just flat out, it makes it unfair that I had this advantage. But I had fresh baked bread, artisanal bread, all the time at my house. Those made excellent sandwiches. Ooh. So they made excellent sandwiches. So I made my own sandwiches on the way to school. And I'd have a ham and pastrami and salami and provolone cheese and Munster cheese and some special aioli on some nice freshly baked sourdough bread. I'd bring it to school. My friends were like, "What is that? And where can I get one?" I was like, "I can make you one for $5. And so I did. Come to find out, my mom told me a few months later, those sandwiches are $12 a piece to actually make. You're selling for $5? I was like, oh, well, I've got some cash. And she's just like, come on, man, get out of here. You can't, because there was an inch and a half of just deli meat on
Dagwoods.
Oh my God, yeah. But I made them for my friends and sold them. And my mom just was like, whatever, you're an idiot. That's
all right. We got 2 more questions.
Ridiculous.
The first of the 2 is, how has your formal and informal training shaped your journey?
Well, for me personally, I think both have actually shaped me more toward that intentional investor, made me a better business person. And I go back to the 10 years prior to finding NARPM, prior to getting into leadership and designation tracks and that sort of thing, and just really pouring into it. It really was a completely different business model. And looking at it, if anyone looked at our company then and now, it's almost unrecognizable, the difference between the 2.
Mine's pretty simple. My formal real estate education taught me how to not get sued selling houses. It's that informal. I started working with investors and then started working with Bryan. And that's changed everything of how I do all kinds of businesses, because it's someone that's not teaching me a curriculum, someone that's teaching me real world because Bryan's done it. There's nothing in property management that Bryan hasn't done. Real easy to learn from him, and that's whether you call it formal or not.
That's the informal part. Formal training. I've got a degree in biblical theology, which I'm
that helps out your real estate career every day, doesn't it?
It certainly does. It really does. So especially in the patience compartment. But yeah, I mean, you know how it is. I mean, you're in the business, and part of the time you're counseling tenants, you're counseling owners. Patience is a must. You can be quick-witted, but you can't be quick-tempered. That's an important piece of the business. So, but that's what has shaped me. So I think all of it has come together and made me obviously who I am today. So
cool. All right. And our final question, what was your Moby Dick of real estate or business, or just that one big opportunity that got away?
Oh, the one that got away. It still may circle back to us, so we see the great white whale again, but
it's never gone. It's never out of reach.
COVID kind of killed it. We came into 2020, we were on fire January, February, and we had expectations and commitments to add 700 properties into our management portfolio in Birmingham alone.
We had 117 addresses under contract on February 4th or something.
Yeah, and all of that fell apart. Now, we were able to salvage and come up. We added close to 225 properties last year, but well off the mark where we were at 700. And the opportunities that came with that, because we were, like I said, we had one large contract, another one we were working, and just a lot of cash to work with. And that kind of the availability of credit to some of the individuals that we were dealing with on large scale. A lot of those lenders went dark for a while. So some of that money was not available. And then they kind of reopened with different terms. So, and we saw some portfolio deals that just fell apart. And particularly the ones we had under contract, it's this backup and punt. So that's probably my Moby Dick. And again, I think that,
guys, it's my Moby Dick.
I think it'll come back. I think maybe Moby will be a little slimmer, maybe not quite as big as he once was.
Well, no. Okay, so what it is it's multitudes of we have the knowledge of expressing what is available in Birmingham. That's what we did. That's how we created this Moby Dick of a whale. It was Bryan and I did a really good job of, you should buy in Birmingham, Alabama, and this is why. And a handful of investors were like, yeah, you're right. Here's lots and lots of money that we want to put in there. Let's find these deals. So we had them all. It was just that money dried up from the lending and from the investors that they had. And we still are working with the clients. We still have the clients. We just got to get that back up. Yeah.
Banks.
Just got to get that flywheel started again, huh?
Yeah, man. It's rough.
Well, cool. Well, guys, really appreciate you coming on. We had a great conversation today. Really, it was super fun. So.
Yeah, it's been great. Do you guys have a sign-off line for your podcast yet?
No.
Can we use ours today?
Sure, go for it.
All right, so ours is, until next time, keep buying, keep learning, and keep earning.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Real Estate Professionals Investing Podcast on WIN, your community for investing knowledge for growth. Please take a second to rate us so that we can get more great investors to interview. If you or someone you know wants to be on, please go to westsideinvestors.com and fill out our form.